The most famous weapon in the Trojan War is not a sword, spear, or chariot. It is a wooden horse that appears only after the greatest warriors are already dead. The city falls in a single night, but the story takes 10 years to reach its gates, and almost none of that complete story is actually told in Homer's Iliad. The Iliad covers only a short period near the end of the war. The beginning, the wooden horse, and the destruction of Troy come from a wider collection of Greek traditions, later poems, plays, and retellings. Those traditions disagree on details, so what follows is the best-known version of the myth, with the uncertain history behind it kept clearly in view. The story begins at a wedding. Peleus, a mortal king, is marrying Thetis, a sea goddess. Nearly every god is invited except Eris, the goddess of discord. She arrives anyway and throws down a golden apple marked for the most beautiful. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claim it. Zeus wisely refuses to judge a contest guaranteed to create three immortal enemies. The decision is handed to Paris, a prince of Troy who has been raised away from the royal court. Each goddess offers him a reward. Hera promises power. Athena promises victory and wisdom. Aphrodite promises the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chooses Aphrodite. There is one administrative problem. The woman is Helen, queen of Sparta, and she is already married to King Menelaus. Paris travels to Sparta as a guest. Then Helen leaves with him for Troy. Some versions describe an abduction, others describe desire, persuasion, or divine interference. The uncertainty matters because later storytellers repeatedly reshaped Helen as victim, traitor, prize, excuse, and survivor. What remains constant is the insult to Menelaus and the crisis that follows. Before Helen's marriage, her many suitors had supposedly sworn an oath to defend the chosen husband. Menelaus now calls on that oath. His brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, becomes commander of a coalition of Greek rulers. These are the Achaeans of Homer, kings and war bands from places such as Mycenae, Pylos, Ithaca, Salamis, and Phthia. Among them are Odysseus, valued for cunning, Ajax, famous for size and strength, Diomedes, one of the most aggressive fighters in the Iliad, and Achilles, the greatest warrior of the expedition. Achilles leads the Myrmidons and, according to later tradition, knows that Troy offers him a choice, a long obscure life at home or a short life followed by permanent fame. The fleet gathers at Aulis. It cannot sail because the winds fail. In the most famous version, the goddess Artemis demands the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia. Some stories say she dies. Others say Artemis replaces her at the last moment with an animal and carries her away. Either way, the opening of the campaign establishes its moral cost. Agamemnon's family is damaged before a Greek soldier reaches Troy. The fleet crosses the Aegean. Ancient tradition gives the Greeks more than 1,000 ships, but that number belongs to epic poetry, not a surviving Bronze Age military report. The landing is resisted. Protesilaus is said to be the first Greek ashore and the first killed. The coalition secures a beachhead, pulls its ships onto the coast, and builds a fortified camp. Troy stands near the entrance to the Dardanelles in northwestern Anatolia, a position connected to movement between the Aegean and the Black Sea. In the legend, King Priam rules the city. His eldest son Hector is its strongest defender. Paris began the crisis, but Hector carries most of the military burden. Beside him are Aeneas and allies from across Anatolia and beyond. The Greeks do not spend 9 straight years charging Troy's walls. The tradition describes raids against nearby settlements, attacks on Trojan allies, livestock seizures, captives, and the division of plunder. This is not a clean duel between heroes. It is a long predatory campaign that devastates communities around the city. By the 10th year, the Greek army is still camped beside its ships. Disease, exhaustion, wounded pride, and competition over captured wealth have become as dangerous as Trojan weapons. This is where the Iliad begins. Agamemnon is forced to return a captive woman named Chryseis after her priest father appeals to Apollo and a plague strikes the Greek camp. Agamemnon compensates himself by taking Briseis, a captive awarded to Achilles. Achilles sees this as a public attack on his honor. He does not leave Troy. He does something more damaging. He refuses to fight and withdraws the Myrmidons. Without Achilles, the war shifts. Paris and Menelaus fight a duel that might have settled the conflict, but divine intervention saves Paris and the truce collapses. Battles spread across the plain. Spears, shields, chariots, and dense formations replace the neat single combat the leaders had promised. Hector drives the Greeks back toward their ships. The Trojans breach the Greek defenses and threaten to burn the fleet. Agamemnon offers gifts and the return of Briseis, but Achilles still refuses. His honor has become more important to him than the coalition's survival. Then Patroclus intervenes. He is Achilles' closest companion. Seeing the camp near collapse, he asks to wear Achilles' armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle. The plan is partly psychological. The Trojans will see the famous armor, believe Achilles has returned, and retreat. It works too well. Patroclus drives the Trojans from the ships and continues toward Troy, despite Achilles' warning not to push too far. Apollo strikes or disorients him in the poem. A Trojan wounds him, and Hector delivers the final blow. Hector takes Achilles' armor as a trophy. Achilles' quarrel ends instantly because the person he most wanted to protect is dead. His mother Thetis brings him new armor forged by Hephaestus, including a shield decorated with an entire world of cities, fields, law courts, harvests, dancing, and war. Achilles returns to battle not for strategy, Helen, or Greece, but for revenge. He drives the Trojans behind their walls and meets Hector outside the city. Hector runs. Achilles chases him around Troy 3 times before Hector finally stands and fights. Achilles kills him, ties the body to his chariot, and drags it back toward the Greek camp. The triumph is deliberately ugly. Hector is dead, but Achilles remains trapped inside his grief. The emotional turning point comes when Priam enters the Greek camp at night and kneels before the killer of his son. He asks Achilles to remember his own father. Achilles finally returns Hector's body. Troy holds a funeral. That is the end of the Iliad. Troy is still standing. Achilles is still alive. The wooden horse does not appear. The later tradition continues the war. New allies arrive for Troy, including Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, and Memnon, a powerful king from the east. Achilles defeats them, but his own death is approaching. Paris shoots him with an arrow, usually with Apollo's help. The famous vulnerable heel belongs mainly to later tradition. The Iliad does not say Achilles is invulnerable everywhere except his ankle. After Achilles is cremated, his armor becomes the prize in another destructive contest. Odysseus is awarded it instead of Ajax. Humiliated, Ajax falls into madness and dies by suicide. The Greeks are winning individual contests and steadily destroying themselves. Prophecies now replace brute force. Troy cannot fall without the bow of Heracles, held by the abandoned Greek archer Philoctetes. The Greeks retrieve him from Lemnos. It also cannot fall without Achilles' son Neoptolemus, who is brought into the war his father did not survive. In many versions, Philoctetes uses Heracles' bow to kill Paris. Helen is then given to another Trojan prince, Deiphobus. Her presence, which supposedly caused the expedition, has become almost irrelevant to the machinery of the siege. Odysseus supplies the final plan. The Greeks build an enormous wooden horse and hide selected warriors inside it. The rest burn or dismantle their camp, sail away from view, and leave one man, Sinon, behind to explain the offering. Sinon tells the Trojans that the Greeks have abandoned the war and that the horse is a sacred gift. The priest Laocoon warns them not to trust it. Cassandra, cursed to speak true prophecies that no one believes, also predicts disaster. Neither warning succeeds. In the best-known version, sea serpents kill Laocoon and his sons, and the Trojans interpret the event as divine punishment for opposing the horse. They drag it through the gates. The city celebrates. At night, the Greek fleet returns. The hidden warriors climb out, kill the guards, and open the gates. Troy is attacked from inside and outside at once. The sack is not a heroic tournament. Priam is killed. Hector's widow Andromache is enslaved. Their young son Astyanax is thrown from the walls in later accounts so that he cannot grow up to avenge Troy. Cassandra is seized. Women are divided among the victors. Temples are violated. The destruction of the city completes the campaign, but it also exposes the brutality that heroic poetry never entirely conceals. Menelaus finds Helen. Some versions say he raises his sword to kill her but cannot do it. They eventually return to Sparta. Agamemnon sails home and is murdered by his wife Clytemnestra, who has not forgotten Iphigenia. Neoptolemus takes Andromache. Aeneas escapes in later tradition and becomes the legendary ancestor of Rome. Odysseus needs another 10 years to reach Ithaca. Victory does not restore the world that existed before the war. Nearly every surviving household carries the consequences. So did any of this happen? The site identified as Troy stands at Hisarlik in modern Turkey. It contains multiple cities built over one another across roughly 4,000 years. Late Bronze Age Troy had substantial fortifications, and destruction layers show that the city suffered catastrophe more than once. Hittite texts refer to a western Anatolian place called Wilusa, widely connected by scholars with Ilios, another Greek name for Troy. They also mention Ahiyawa, often linked with the Mycenaean Greek world. This does not prove that one united Greek army fought a 10-year war for Helen, or that Achilles, Hector, and the horse existed. Archaeology confirms a real city in a contested region. It leaves open whether the legend preserves one conflict, several conflicts merged together, or a mostly invented story built around distant memories of the late Bronze Age. Homeric poetry took shape centuries after the period it describes. By then, singers had carried the story through generations, adding gods, speeches, heroes, and moral arguments. The result is not a battlefield report. It is a myth constructed around the costs of anger, honor, vengeance, and war. The Greeks begin the story demanding the return of one woman. They end it by enslaving many others. Achilles chooses fame and discovers that fame cannot return Patroclus. Agamemnon wins Troy and loses his own house. Troy's walls resist 10 years of bronze, but not one night of deception. The war ends not when sword defeats sword, but when the gates open for a wooden horse.